everyone. How are y'all enjoying this beautiful Saturday early afternoon in Las Vegas for Rare Evo? Woo, yay. All right, well, if you're getting up to leave, I highly recommend you take a seat because we have a very awesome speaker coming up. He's going to be talking about mining and building on Bitcoin, which is actually pretty interesting considering that you actually can build on Bitcoin in 2024.
Interested in partnering with Rare now?
So without further ado, we have Jullian Duran. He is the product lead at Marathon Digital Holdings, and his session is going to be Bitcoin scaling, what infrastructure and adoption should look like moving forward. Go ahead and give a round of applause for Jullian.
All right, hello everybody. Let's see if this works all right. I think the clicker's not working. That's all right. We'll just chat. So my name's Jullian. I'm a product lead at Marathon Digital Holdings. You might have seen us in the news recently for buying 100 mil or so of Bitcoin. We're massive believers in the ecosystem. We're big believers in the currency. But where I come into play is what can we do with the ledger, with the blockchain, with Bitcoin, the asset, moving forward. Not just thinking of Bitcoin as a store of value and not just thinking of it as something to hold on to and see rise, the number go up philosophy, but rather what can we do to actually enable new kinds of utility. Presentation isn't working, so that's okay. I'll just chat through it. Where I come into play and where the Enduro team, you're going to see this word Enduro throughout this presentation, we're an innovation unit within Marathon Digital Holdings. And so what that means is we're essentially looking at what is the future of Bitcoin adoption going to look like and what technology can we build today to enable that. And so Enduro at a high level, you can think of it as a miner's attempt to try to drive increasing transaction fee revenue. Because at the end of the day, that's what keeps Bitcoin safe. If you're able to drive new forms of utility, people are going to be using Bitcoin more, they're going to be sending, they're going to be receiving, and of course that makes more fees for a miner. So if you're curious about what the miner's perspective is in Bitcoin scaling, always think about the fees. We're interested in velocity, we want to see people use the actual asset. And so Enduro, where it's born out of, is this desire to create infrastructure to enable new kinds of ideas to be built on Bitcoin. I like to say that we're building the infrastructure and the interfaces to drive new kinds of Bitcoin adoption. Now, to dive a little bit into the question of infrastructure, we have to understand how the Bitcoin blockchain currently works. It's simple by design, right? That's what makes it the most secure of the blockchain networks. The fact that somebody can really only send, receive Bitcoin, and with ordinals and runes, you can mint and transfer new types of tokens. But by and large, Bitcoin is supposed to be a simple, secure ledger with simple functionality. Because when you start introducing smart contracts and all of those sort of things at the native layer 1 level, you start to introduce new kinds of risks and exploits, and of course, nodes then become very centralized. So one of the defining principles of what I'm trying to do and what Marathon, how we think of Bitcoin scaling is, let's leave Bitcoin's simplicity, because that's honestly what's been given it at its strength. So given that we leave Bitcoin layer 1 alone, that only leaves us really layer 2, right? What can we build on top of, to the side of, ancillary to Bitcoin to empower developers to develop new types of applications? And so the first part of Enduro, one of its, I say like half of our product suite, is actually building sidechains. And sidechains at a simple way are simply a blockchain that is attached to Bitcoin in some ways that are immutable, that shares some of Bitcoin's security properties, but that enables new kinds of programmability so that people can, for example, build a Uniswap on Bitcoin. They can build an Aave on Bitcoin. They can build whatever type of DeFi primitive you would see on Ethereum on Bitcoin. All right, so that's what sidechains are at a high level, right? So in our layer 2, some important things to note: we're not launching a token, right? We don't want to stray too far away from the Bitcoin ideal. The Bitcoin ideal is build. It's create infrastructure. It is attract developers. Don't just incentivize people with an ICO or with a token that goes up and down, but incentivize people with technology. And that's one of the core principles of the sort of infrastructure that we're building on Bitcoin. A lot of people in the audience, you guys might not be native Bitcoiners, and you might think, well, that sounds kind of silly. Why wouldn't you launch a native token? Because without a native token, obviously, you don't have quite as many incentive levers to drive people to actually use your chain. And so here's, I'd say, where Marathon thinks a little bit differently about the situation, because We're a publicly traded company. We obviously have investors to answer to. We're not as interested in just driving short-term engagement. We want to build long-term infrastructure that engages builders in the long term, as opposed to just, hey, come build, deploy a smart contract, we'll give you a grant, move on with your life. We really want to build platforms that empower mainstream businesses, that enable new kinds of commerce, that again, drive new kinds of Bitcoin adoption. And so that brings me actually to the second half of the product suite that Enduro offers. It's not just about infrastructure and sidechains, it's actually also about what new things can people do with Bitcoin. What interfaces, what applications can we create to try to, again, bring Bitcoin into a new dimension. And so here we actually have a number of different apps that we are incubating. You could say that Enduro in some ways is a Bitcoin layer 2. In other ways, it's actually an app studio. And the justification for why to build apps, why to build interfaces, why would a mining company get involved in consumer-facing crypto apps? It's because, again, the only way I believe to drive transaction fee revenue is to give people concrete reasons to use Bitcoin. Don't just tell them what is possible. Don't just give them esoteric infrastructure and expect them to deploy smart contracts. Actually show them what can happen and empower businesses to do new things. And so in the presentation, I kind of go through some different app spotlights. I'll tell you guys a little bit about what we're doing. We're trying to tokenize and bring tokens that are non-Bitcoin related to the Bitcoin ecosystem. At a high level, we're tokenizing money, we're tokenizing assets, and we're tokenizing loyalty. So I'm going to talk about each and every one of these different verticals and exactly which sort of interfaces we're building to enable those sort of things. So I'm going to start with money because that obviously is the easiest thing to understand. Bitcoin was created to be a payments network. Technical lead from my team always talks about how his Dell computer, he bought it with Bitcoin. And I actually find that story incredible because, I came into Bitcoin much later than he did. And so I never really was around when you could literally buy a Dell computer with Bitcoin. And it's crazy to me that you can no longer do that anymore. Now, for those who are knowledgeable about Bitcoin's history, you probably know why you can no longer buy Bitcoin with, a Dell computer with Bitcoin. But let's just leave the politics and the history aside. The problem is that you can't anymore. And so what can we as Enduro or within Marathon Digital do to change that? We're creating a sidechain and we're creating an application on top of that sidechain that enables businesses to pay cross-border with Bitcoin. So why cross-border payments? Why businesses? Let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Fundamentally, I believe one of the biggest core value props of Bitcoin is actually that of fintech, right? It's enabling new kinds of financial primitives. And I think stablecoins are a pretty important aspect of that, but obviously not the only thing. Lots of people across the world pay with Bitcoin. I talk with exchanges in Africa and Latin America all the time. I live out in Dubai, so it's obviously easier to get to the eastern part of the world. But a lot of these exchanges talk about how half of their volumes right now in payments are coming in the form of USDT on Tron, but the other half are actually coming in the form of Bitcoin. And when I say that, people are kind of surprised. Well, why must that be? Why are exchanges in Nigeria or exchanges in Brazil seeing a lot of Bitcoin being used as payments, and why are they seeing a lot of stablecoin volume? It's because at the end of the day, finance in the emerging world depends on a, let's say, immutable third-party ledger like Bitcoin, like other blockchain networks, because local finance is not quite as trustworthy. Now, I'm from Ecuador. I can say from personal experience, this is indeed the case. It's best to trust a blockchain, a permissionless blockchain network, than local finance. And what we're doing in Enduro is building an interface in order for businesses in emerging markets to use Bitcoin as that payment system. Now, the last bit I'll cover in this section is cross-border, right? Why not just enable coffee buying with Bitcoin? That's the age-old example, right? The world is going to be a better place when I can go to a shop and pay with Bitcoin. Voila, we've solved all our global problems. The reality is, in the past 5 years, real-time payment systems, domestic payment systems, in other words, have become incredibly more powerful and efficient than they were before. Nowadays, if you want to pay locally in Brazil, in Mexico, in India, in Kazakhstan, in China, wherever you name it, it's actually really easy to do it with local currency. And so when you go and talk to users in emerging economies and you kind of assess what are their payment pain points, buying coffee isn't a problem. The problem comes when you need to pay an overseas contractor, or when you need to import a piece of machinery, or when you need to buy food from all the other ends of the globe. That's where payment problems begin, and that's where crypto has a unique value prop. Why? Because it's a decentralized ledger. right? People, one Bitcoin is worth one Bitcoin in places as far away as Mongolia and in places as close by as Cuba.
Enjoying the event? Fire up that wallet and delegate your ADA to Rare Stake Pool. For over 3 years, Rare has been committed to providing high-quality staking services. And we're now Chang Hard Fork ready. Thank you for your support.
Bitcoin is that settlement layer between all of these different currencies. And as somebody who used to work in finance and used to work in fintech, I can tell you that having one single DB, one single database, one single ledger is tremendously valuable and cuts costs by an astronomical proportion. And so coming back to Enduro and what we're doing in this innovation unit, we're building an app called Manda. And the goal of Manda is basically to try to reinvent payments and to bring some of that payment volume to Bitcoin. There's no reason that, no shade to Tron, they're incredible with their business development, but there's no reason that payments of stablecoins and of Bitcoin should be happening on any other network that isn't Bitcoin, or rather on any other network that isn't connected intimately to Bitcoin. People globally trust Bitcoin more. They care more about the ledger. They follow the news on Bitcoin. It's only natural that it also be the ledger of choice for payments. And we want to make that happen. So that's tokenizing money. Now we're going to move on to tokenizing assets, tokenizing capital, right? And here I'm going to talk about RWAs. I think a lot of you probably know about RWAs. We usually hear this in the context of treasuries, Ondo finance, and this sort of thing. That's not really what I'm talking about here. What I'm more talking about is how can we tokenize stranded assets, in other words, niche capital, on Bitcoin to enable new kinds of investors. So what do I mean by that? Right? What is the single biggest problem with venture capital, or rather with any sort of fundraising in any part of the world? It's that you got to know a guy or you got to know a gal. It's difficult. It's a closed system. It's obviously relationship based. What school you come from matters a lot. Your nationality, your passport matter a lot. What we want to do with Enduro is empower new kinds of tokenization platforms to enable new kinds of capital fundraisers, and that way make capital markets globally more efficient. So let's think of a concrete example. We're working on a pilot right now with a whiskey distillery company in the United States, and whiskey, as you can imagine, is a very valuable asset, and people have tried to tokenize it before. But what exactly is the problem that Bitcoin in this case can solve? Biggest thing is, whiskey is a bit of a niche asset. Right? If I'm a whiskey distillery company and I want to list my whiskey token, or rather garner investors to invest in whiskey barrels for me to age for 3 to 5 years, I can't just do that on Amazon. I can't just do that via my local bank, and connecting with a network of investors is very difficult. And so that's why at Enduro we built the application called Avant, right? Something forward, looking beyond, right? Thinking about whiskey tokens, thinking about ship tokens, thinking about real estate equity funds, whatever you name it, thinking about putting that on Bitcoin to enable new kinds of capital market and cap table flexibility. So I'll paint you a picture. A world in which we're successful is one in which real world asset tokens, that by the way would be yield bearing. In the case of whiskey tokens, I think the ROI is 20% year over year. We want to enable a future where that's more accessible to people, where if you're in an emerging economy, or you're even here in the United States and getting a brokerage account is too difficult, or navigating the stock market seems too risky, you can invest in things like homegrown industries, agriculture, hard manufacturing, whatever you want to call it, right? That's what we could enable, and Bitcoin makes it more possible because Bitcoin has it's the network with the most market cap. There are so many people invested in it, and as you could probably see from a litany of Bitcoin layer 2s that have come up recently, everybody is trying to offer Bitcoin yield. Coming back to Marathon Digital, coming back to what we're doing, we want to offer Bitcoiners the potential to earn returns on their Bitcoin, but we want to do it in a judicious way. Because I don't believe that just offering people yield, staking yield on Bitcoin as an example, is necessarily going to solve things, because what you're really doing is you're offering yield on an asset with a fixed supply. At a certain point, somebody will get rugged. But in the case of RWA tokens and bringing real-world asset tokenization and new kinds of capital market fundraisers, now you're talking about a sustainable form of yield that can actually be connected to the real world, enable new kinds of commerce, and promote financial inclusion globally. So that's tokenizing capital. The last bit I'll get into is tokenizing loyalty. And I think this topic often kind of loses people a little bit because tokenizing loyalty, how could that matter in the context of money? And how could that matter in the context of capital? Jullian, you're talking to me about all these great things of financial inclusion. How could loyalty be part of the mix? Well, the interesting thing about loyalty is loyalty at the end of the day, it empowers businesses to perform better marketing. When you're able to engage your customer base in new and innovative ways and offer them rewards for being your customer, you as a small business, as a mid-sized business owner, are empowered to do better business and to provide better customer experiences. The problem with loyalty and rewards programs is we're often rewarded as customers with things that really don't matter, right? If I gave you a Jullian token for coming to my restaurant, you probably would have nothing to do with that, right? If you live right next to the restaurant and a Jullian token entitles you to cash back, maybe then you have some value. But for the vast majority of businesses, it's not like you're going to come back and be a regular at every single restaurant or at every hotel or at every tourism agency, et cetera, et cetera. And so particularly small businesses, not the Starbucks, this is not the McDonald's, but small and medium-sized businesses have an issue where it's very difficult for them to engage customers and, more importantly, to retain their customer base. And so what we're doing over at Enduro is we built an application called Amuse Bouche, and we're piloting it in parts of the UAE and parts of Europe with restaurants in order to basically create a unified restaurant loyalty program, something that connects restaurants from disparate parts of the world, specifically in tourist hubs, and offers customers, you guessed it, Bitcoin, right? So why offer customers Bitcoin? Who would want to give Bitcoin to customers? Well, to understand that, you have to think beyond where the Bitcoin ecosystem is today. Today's Bitcoin holders do not like to spend Bitcoin. We know that Marathon hodls, more than almost any other business out there in the world. So I know what the hodling perspective is. Most businesses, on the other hand, and most restaurants that we've spoken to, they don't see Bitcoin as a hodl asset. They see it as an engagement tool. They want to buy it in order to engage their customers when they personally might not have a big interest in the ecosystem or in the blockchain network, but they do have an interest in engaging new kinds of people. And so what we found is creating a restaurant loyalty platform where each of the contributing businesses reward Bitcoin, and not a lot of Bitcoin. In Europe, we're talking about €1 worth of Bitcoin. In the UAE, we're talking about 2 AED worth of Bitcoin. It's not that much that we're giving out, but by these restaurants being enabled to give cash back in an asset that everybody across the world respects, they're actually now empowered to be able to engage new kinds of customers no matter their nationality. And I think here is the critical part of why loyalty is part of this tokenization narrative that we're trying to drive on Bitcoin, because loyalty points in many ways are the hardest to try to settle across different businesses. Think about the innovation that Meta, that all of these social media providers, these social media networks provide. The value that they provide is they allow businesses to market, right? They allow any hairdresser to car salesman to be able to provide their good or service on some shared network. That is exactly what Bitcoin should be doing and what blockchain generally should be doing, but it's not because we're too focused on particular kinds of DeFi. So I've told you about our product suite. I've told you how we're building the infrastructure and the interfaces for new kinds of Bitcoin adoption. I'll conclude with simply saying where I see Bitcoin going forward. That was the title of this talk, right? Where is the future of Bitcoin scaling? I think to understand that, we need to understand where Bitcoin scaling is today. What's the narrative? Now, most people that I talk to that are interested in new types of Bitcoin narratives have probably heard of the Lightning Network. They might have heard of Stacks. They might have heard of some other layer 2 networks. I'd say common to every single attempt to scale Bitcoin, it's often infrastructure-led and not adoption-led. And I think that's the single greatest problem of the Bitcoin scaling narrative, and why, as Bitcoiners, we're getting clobbered by innovation on Solana, on Ethereum, on other types of networks. I think a lot of people in the Bitcoin ecosystem are not opening their eyes to the possibility of recruiting new kinds of developers, lessening the learning curve, and trying to create interfaces for mass adoption. So that's the single biggest thing that we're trying to focus on at Enduro is let's change that narrative. Let's make new kinds of infrastructure on Bitcoin defined on the basis of what it can do for everyday people. What are the sort of things that mainstream businesses could see solved? What are problems they could have solved on Bitcoin? And let's build the technology to enable that to happen. That's not what's happening today, but that's what I see happening in the future. I believe the Bitcoin network being the most global and being the most decentralized has a brand appeal that's actually pretty incredible. I mean, think about it this way. How much money did Apple have to spend in the past 40 years for that half-eaten Apple logo to just mean something in every part of the world, from Bengaluru to the outskirts of Las Vegas? Everybody sees that Apple logo and knows exactly what it means. And Bitcoin is very much in a similar position. All that it takes, the point that we're at right now, is catalyzing that brand recognition, leveraging that security and that resilience, and trying to drive new forms of mainstream crypto adoption. Because the truth is, the majority of the world is just waiting for the great application, for the next big mass adoption narrative to hit them. They just don't have the interface to access it. And that's all we're trying to do here at Enduro. So thank you everybody for your time. And if you want to follow us or you want to know more about what we're building, mara.com, that's obviously the website of the mining company that I work at. My particular team, Enduro, ANDURO.io, that's our website. And feel free to shoot us a note, catch us on X. We're always talking and going to different events, so we're more than happy to connect. Thank you everybody for your time.
Rare Evo 2025 tickets are on sale now. Save big. General admission passes are discounted to $250. And VIP passes are only $800. Join us August 7th through 9th, 2025 at Caesars Palace, Las Vegas. Hurry, only 30 days left to save. Visit rareevo.io and buy your tickets now.